and thank you for joining us on ILTV's weekly edition One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz, a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Each week, you have the chance to get your questions answered by one of America's greatest legal minds. Professor Dershowitz joins us now from Martha's Vineyard. Hello to you.
Good. Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. Let's get straight to our first guest, Governor Mike Huckabee. Mike is a former presidential candidate as well as a well-known talk show host and author. Let's hear from him.
Well, Alan, I'm at the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, and this is about my fifth trip here since December of last year. There have been some extraordinary things happening, as you well know, things that I think are significant for Israel and for the relationship that Israel has with the United States. Obviously, the moving of the embassy. You and I were both here for that momentous moment, and it was surreal. But I also think it's opened a whole new chapter for the Middle East, and it's given a new hope and a new platform to build upon. Totally opposite the thinking of many people who thought that it would bring disruption to the Middle East. On the other hand, it's really kind of settled the issue of Jerusalem, and it's made it very clear that Jerusalem is not going to be a divided city. It will be the ancestral, indigenous, and historical capital of the Jewish state. And I think that's an important thing to settle. I would love to get your comments on if you think that the move by the president, after all these years of promises, finally getting to the point of bringing the embassy home to Jerusalem, has proven to be a good thing. And then on a personal note, I'd love to get your thoughts, Alan, on what can be done to help restore some civility to the political climate of the U.S. I'm watching it with my own daughter, thrown out of a restaurant in Virginia, not because of something she did or said or because she acted up or behaved improperly, but simply because she went there to eat and she worked for Donald Trump, and that was unacceptable to the owner. And I know you're experiencing some of this, even at Martha's Vineyard, a place you've been to many, many times, and yet now completely different atmosphere. So would love to hear your thoughts on how to return some level of civility back to our political climate and just bring a simple sense of manners back.
Well, thank you, Mike. Mike's a great American and a great, great friend of Israel, who I've known for many years. I've been privileged to be on his show, and I really appreciate your two questions. First, I think that recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's eternal capital was long overdue. Virtually every modern American president promised it, and only this president carried it out. I was honored to be there with my grandson. I do think it was absolutely essential, following the despicable Security Council resolution engineered by President Obama, to declare Jewish Jerusalem, that is the Western Wall, the Plaza, the access roads to Hebrew University and Hadassah Hospital and the Jewish Quarter, to be illegally occupied territory. It was that horrible decision that changed the status quo of Jerusalem, and it was essential for the president to change the status quo back and to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. I met with President Trump, and I urged him to do that, and the reason I gave him was the UN resolution, which was designed to tie the hands of President Trump. It was, remember, it was passed in December of 2016, when President Trump had already been elected and was president-elect. And it was calculated to tie his hands. And I thought it was essential for President Trump to untie his own hands and to resolve the issue of Jerusalem. And it's amazing that when American Jews and others were asked under President Obama, should the embassy be moved, the vast majority said yes. But when Trump moved the embassy, a very substantial number of American Jews said no, they didn't favor it because anything Trump does is bad, anything Obama did was good. Israel must remain a bipartisan issue. We can never allow it to become an issue in which we assess the results based on who did it and who didn't do it. I do think that settling the issue of Jerusalem has turned out to be a very good thing. We haven't heard very much criticism from the Sunni Arab countries Yes, the Palestinians have said they refuse to come to the bargaining table, but they'll never get a state unless they come to the bargaining table. So I think it was a good thing. There are many parts of policies of President Trump that I don't support. His immigration policies, his attitudes toward the people at Charlottesville, some of his tax and other policies, but moving the embassy is something I completely support. And that's why I made it my point to be there when the official embassy opened. As far as the second question, it's such a disturbing question. I'm publishing an op-ed today or tomorrow, simply giving the emails that I have gotten as a result of me defending not Donald Trump, I voted for Hillary Clinton, but defending the president against improper violations of civil liberties and defending the Constitution. I have been threatened with all kinds of things. One email threatened to have a woman set me up and falsely accuse me. Another one threatened to put a bullet in my head. Another one threatened members of my family. These are serious matters. I've been compared to the public intellectuals who helped Hitler come to power. The level of incivility, the level of screaming and yelling on both sides is far, far too great. And the extremes in both parties are gaining more and more power. The left is becoming more hard left on the Democrat side, and the extremists on the right are gaining more influence on the Republican side. And both the United States and Israel thrive at the center. Jews have historically been caught between the red and the black, the red of communism and the black of fascism. And we thrive at the center. We must try to move our politics toward the center and away from extremes. We're not succeeding. And it's a worldwide trend. We're seeing it in Eastern Europe. We're seeing it in many parts of the world. So Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, people like Mike Huckabee and me, have to work together to have conversations, to talk to each other instead of screaming at each other, threatening each other, and refusing to interact with each other. So thank you, Mike, for your great support for Israel and for the United States.
Professor Dershowitz, I would like to pick up here on another issue, the fraud trial of Donald Trump's former campaign chairman. A judge has ordered Paul Manafort to be held without bail, facing up to 300 years in prison. Now Manafort is the first of Trump's former aides to go on trial in the Russia probe. Professor Dershowitz, how related is this fraud case against him to that?
Well, Manafort's most serious crime is his association with Donald Trump. Don't believe me, Judge Ellis, the judge presiding over his trial today in Virginia, made a finding that this was not about Manafort, that the special counsel doesn't have a real interest in Manafort's tax problems and bank problems, that his goal is to get a conviction so he can squeeze Manafort into testifying against Trump and people in the White House. As the judge so eloquently put it, sometimes that squeezed witnesses not only sing, but they compose. They make up stories. They exaggerate. I used to teach my students in first year criminal law that if you're ever going to commit a crime in America, always do it with someone more important than you are so you can turn them in, and they can't turn you in. That's a terrible problem. It exists in Israel as well, where close associates of prominent political figures are squeezed for information and sometimes provide improper information that is not accurate. And so every civil libertarian should be concerned about this tactic of law enforcement, which threatens innocent people being convicted on the basis of false testimony squeezed from witnesses who are facing the choice, either die in prison or provide evidence, whether real or fake, against your former associates. I think that's what's happening in the Manafort case today.
All right, thank you, Professor. Let's move on now to Syria, where the 7-year-long war has devastated the country, leaving 13.1 million people in need. This week, international efforts are underway in Sochi, Russia, to start drafting a new Syrian constitution. Also on the agenda, refugees and the humanitarian crisis. In the latest happenings on the border with Israel, Syrian government forces took back the largely ruined city of Quneitra from rebel hands and is now tightening its hold on the Syrian sector of the Golan Heights. Israel now closely watching developments there on the border. To To discuss some of Israel's involvement and the humanitarian situation, let's introduce today's studio guest, founder and CEO of Israeli Flying Aid, a non-profit volunteer organization that provides life-saving aid in areas of natural disaster and conflict. Gal Lusky, welcome to the show, Gal.
Thank you.
Before we start, let's show a short video from the Israeli Flying Aid, which has a look at the situation inside Syria.
And the world was quiet. No one made a sound of the people's problems. Don't concern us, and the world was quiet. And the world was quiet.
Right, firstly, Gal, tell us a bit about the work that you do and where it happens.
So Israeli Flying Aid is a non-profit volunteer-based Israeli NGO that provides aid and relief to countries that do not have diplomatic relations with Israel and to communities in countries that do not allow the entry of life-saving aid into their territories.
We just had a look at Syria. What would you say are the most critical issues that citizens are facing there?
Well, I think what they face is the world's ignorance. That's the first thing they face, and they have been facing that for the last 7.5 years. I think there's a huge hypocrisy concerning those countries. When it's not concerning Israel, the world is really silent. You couldn't even see any condemnation at the Security Council. It's always a matter of vetoes of the strong countries. And looking into the Security Council Charter at the Chapter 7 and responsibility to protect and understanding, that's what made me decide to establish my own NGO and not support others. I would say, and I would ask Professor Dershowitz, what needs to be done in order to change R2P, responsibility to protect, to the O2P, obligation to protect. And this obligation should concern facts and basic, numbers and not political agendas and vetoes. And the right of those innocent victims on the field in Syria, for example, women and children and orphans that are facing that horrific situation needs to be taken care by specific numbers and not by, again, political agendas.
Look, I agree completely, and I think Gal deserves to be nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize for the work that she's doing and doing in an unheralded way and taking tremendous risks to help people she doesn't know. But I think she put her finger right on it. I have said for years and written for years that the main victims of the double standard applied to Israel at the United Nations, on university campuses, by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, George Soros, the main victims are not Israelis or Israel. The main victims of the focus on Israel are the people of Syria, the people who used to be victims of genocide in Rwanda and Darfur, Cambodia. The world simply doesn't want to look at the real human rights tragedies that are going on because they prefer to focus only on Israel. If you go on a college campus today and ask your typical ignoramus student or hard left professor about Syria, they'll say, what are you talking about? It's Israel, it's the West Bank. Have you seen what's going on in Ramallah? Have you seen what's going on in Nablus? Do you know what's happening in Hebron, in Gaza, Syria? Where's that? We never heard of it. Rwanda? I don't know what that is. It's Africa. We're not interested in those countries. So the hypocrisy of the so-called human rights movement, which I call the human left's movement, which refuses to focus on real mass killings and mass immigration problems all over the world and uses Israel as the excuse for doing it, has created enormous, enormous problems. Gal is trying to bring those problems to the attention of the world. Every time I speak on a university campus, I speak about Syria, I speak about the other human rights disasters in the world, and the students continue to march only against Israel. Students were more concerned about moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem than they are about the hundreds of thousands of people who were killed, about the use of illegal weapons of war against Syrian civilians, about what's going on with children and mothers, about how Israel is trying to help people who have come across the northern border, even though Syria is an enemy of Israel. This is a story that has to be told, and it's a story that has to be told not only in words but in actions. And Gal is the leader of the actions that are today being taken to help people that are at war, a country that's at war essentially with its own people, as well as not at peace with Israel. So kol hakavod, all the honor goes to Gal and to the people, the brave people who work with her.
Let's take it back then to Syria. What would you say these bodies are actually doing to create a safe environment for those displaced people to return safely, if anything?
So the first stage that the Assad regime needs to try and do is to rebuild the trust between his own government and parties with his own civilians. I can't see for now many of those refugees going back to Syria from the neighboring countries. Not to their own homes, not to the work they could not go back to, or let alone not to the threats that are still out there for them. I really hope that one day, maybe addressing the Americans that left the Human Rights Council just now and taking advantage and see that as an opportunity, we can convince the American government to pass direct aid to Syrians at the other side of the Golan that are not accessible to any other aid. UN is not providing any of the opposition. UN is passing aid only to the hands of the local government or regime. And there's any chance that this help will get to the right victims of this war. And, US left that council. Maybe it's an opportunity to the Israeli government to address the Americans and ask them to pass direct American aid via the Golan and deduct it from the annual fees that they're passing to the UN annually.
Talking about that border area, what is Israel doing at the moment in Syria, especially after the Syrian regime took over that part of Quneitra in the Golan Heights?
So these are sad moments for all of us. We have been working with the IDF for the last 2.5 years, with a very tight collaboration, talking and speaking with Syrian doctors, medical facilities. We have been passing tons and tons of baby formula since women or mothers of newborns cannot even breastfeed due to the loss and trauma and stress. Joint ventures with Christian NGOs, Joseph Project, Baylor Hospitals in Texas moved tons and tons of equipment to that buffer zone, providing, the civilians and medical capacities for those people that are much more accessible to Quneitra district than to the Israeli hospitals. I wish that the day will come and maybe the government or regime in Syria will understand, our aid is focused on civilians and it hasn't got any other agenda. And I wish that they will come and will be invited by the government to continue that help.
Professor Dershowitz, what do you have to say to that?
I think that's a fond hope and a fond dream. I doubt the Syrian government will ever have the self-confidence to officially accept aid from Israel. I would hope that the aid on an informal basis can continue. Look, it is certainly possible that if the situation in Syria stabilizes, but I don't see any likelihood that will happen in the near future, that the government of Syria will realize that a stable Israel is the best protector of instability in the Arab area. I think many of the Sunni Arab countries now realize that not only is Israel not a barrier to peace in the Middle East, Israel is the securer of peace in the Middle East. It's what prevents Iran from overrunning some of the Gulf states and other Sunni countries. That Israel is a force for stability, a force for human rights, a force for basic rights. I wish there were Syrians like Gal. We wish there were people in the Gaza like Gal. It's so important for Israel to continue to do its humanitarian work. Pikuach Nefesh lies at the core of Jewish values, and Pikuach Nefesh doesn't distinguish between the nefesh, the life, the soul of a Muslim and the soul of a Jew. And I wish the world could get a better look at what Gal and others are doing. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that the world will someday come to recognize the great contribution Israel is making to efforts at resolving these refugee issues and other medical issues growing out of the horrible, horrible Syrian conflict.
Talking of souls there, I want to ask you on a personal note, if it's okay, what led you into this kind of work?
You know, I left the kibbutz. I was born and raised in a kibbutz in the northern part of Israel. My only brother was wounded very badly in Lebanon, and I had two solutions: either to go for revenge and hatred, either to feel blessed for the fact I was born in Israel with those amazing infrastructures supporting me, and be there for others that were way less lucky than me. And I chose that.
Something very special there. You're someone very special. Thank you, Gal Lasky, for joining us and for all your work and efforts across the world.
Thank you, Gal.
Thank you.
Before we finish the show, Professor Dershowitz, any last thoughts?
Well, I think that Gal is the face of Israel, and it's so important for people in the world to know what Israel is doing constructively and positively, particularly on college and university campuses. In the end, Israel doesn't need propaganda. All it needs is truthful renditions of the good work it does all around the world, and Gal represents that important face of Israel's creative and constructive efforts. So again, thank you so much, Gal, for the great work you do.
And thank you, Professor Dershowitz. That's all the time we have for this week's edition of One-on-One with Professor Alan Dershowitz. If you'd like to have your questions answered, why not log on to our Facebook page or take a look at our website. That's iltv.tv. Thanks for watching. See you again next week. Bye-bye.